it is yours to dream big. One of the questions that I get asked a lot is, how do you find your purpose? Now, I believe that this is a question that we realize more so as we continue this journey of life. Many ask the question, why are we here? What is the point of doing these things? Going after a goal, achieving a goal. And although there are many interpretations, I earnestly believe in finding your own internal interpretation. See, in the last video, we spoke of the power of the subconscious mind, and we've been discussing the feeling. We've also been discussing intuition. I believe that these aspects hold secrets, or you could say revelations, as to these questions that might perplex us. And many of us wonder these questions, some might not. And what we find is that when we ask these questions, we start to reveal the answers. In the last Neville Goddard video, I shared with you a lucid dreaming experience. Now, one of the things I didn't share in there was I actually wondered if there was other individuals having the same dream and that we all were converging in that particular room. I recommend watching that video. And if I went up to them and I started talking to them and I asked them questions, who are you, where are you from, and so forth, that perhaps they would reveal to me some insights that they were individuals who were also having that same dream. Now, I didn't do that. As many of you know, I left that room lucidly, and I went into a world where it felt like it was 2 or 3 hours where I was in this world, so much so that I thought I was stuck in the world, so I woke myself out of the dream. Now, interestingly enough, I received a message on my Instagram. So this individual wrote me a message and shared with me that they also had this experience, that they were in a room, and they really resonated with that video. And they shared with me some other details as to their experiences with this room. And also, they decided that they were going to leave the room like I did. And they mentioned that as they left the room, they could fly and do other things, see different solar systems and so forth. Now, many of us have these kinds of experiences. A lot of times we don't talk about these experiences because we seem to have a conversation that is, let's say, a common narrative. But when we come across information, such as what we discussed in our Neville conversations, we realize that there's a lot more to this existence. Certainly, some of the interpretations that I went into deep study on through my introduction through Hermeticism via the Kabbalion, we recognize the all is infinite. I mean, do we really stop and comprehend what that actually means? Can we? Infinite. What I've realized is that the more we aim to comprehend and understand, we certainly understand, and we also realize that we can understand it even more so. And so, as I continue this journey, I recognize even more so the value of this information. And one of my interpretations of why I believe I'm here actually is from Hermetic teachings, which is that we were given the 2 gifts of speech and mind. Neville has brought this up a number of times. And should we choose to, we can consciously work with these 2 gifts of speech and mind, inner speech and mind, or imagination. And we can consciously experience aspects of reality that we desire. Now, this is both rewarding as well as it seems to teach us certain things, such as that dream that I had. So Neville actually discussed something. Somebody asked him a question. So I want to get into this discussion and relate it over to this finding meaning, finding purpose. The question was asked, is it possible to imagine several things at the same time? Or should I confine my imagining to one desire? Now, Neville gave a very interesting response. He said, personally, I like to confine my imaginal act to a single thought. But that does not mean I will stop there. During the course of the day, I may imagine many things. But instead of imagining lots of small things, I would suggest that you imagine something so big it includes all the little things. Instead of imagining wealth, health, and friends, imagine being ecstatic. You could not be ecstatic and be in pain. You could not be ecstatic and be threatened with a disposition notice. You could not be ecstatic if you were not enjoying a full measure of friendship and love. What would the feeling be like were you ecstatic, without knowing what had happened to produce your ecstasy? Reduce the idea of ecstasy to the single sensation. Isn't it wonderful? Do not allow the conscious, reasoning mind to ask why. Because if it does, it will start to look for visible causes, and then the sensation will be lost. Rather, repeat over and over again, isn't it wonderful? Suspend judgment as to what is wonderful. Catch the one sensation of the wonder of it all, and things will happen to bear witness to the truth of this sensation. And I promise you, it will include all the things. Now, upon working with this information and looking at my own experience, I recognize that this response is accurate and true. Now, I've gone through different journeys where I committed to this ecstatic feeling, which I relate over to flow, which I relate to intuition and resonance. So I believe purpose in life is to connect to and maintain this feeling. Because then what I find is everything seems to work out. I remember a while back, I had an idea and it made me feel ecstatic. I remember that feeling. Then, some way, somehow, I ended up having a conversation with Iris Reading. And what ended up happening was he asked me if I was interested in teaching a number of these different workshops in which they would cover my travel, my hotel, my fees, etc. So we ended up putting a schedule together, and then I ended up having this experience. Because what I was really looking for was what intuition was guiding me towards. And some way, somehow, the vision of what that means popped into my imagination. And also the way of how it played out exactly ended up being that way. And I have here with me this email that I sent to one of my clients' assistant because I notified them as to my travel schedule so that I can adjust accordingly. So I keep this with me and I look at it regularly because I recognize that another important lesson in this life is that as we commit to something and bring forth a vision, we actually find that we have greater self-confidence and ability to work with the subconscious mind because we have reference experience. And that this feeling emerges yet again for something that is ecstatic, the next step, the next goal. Now, on the process of realizing these goals, we also go through what I refer to as purification of the mind, which is the revelation of, the identification of certain kinds of beliefs, interpretations, perspectives that we a lot of times unconsciously have been identifying with that is not representative of who we really truly are, which I believe is a representation of this feeling here. Ecstatic. So, Chicago, New York to Los Angeles, back to Toronto, back to Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver, Los Angeles, Fremont, California, San Diego to Toronto, to Playa del Carmen, to Toronto, to Ottawa, and back to Toronto. And then I wrote a note, October 5th, to be determined. Just like that, all the flights were booked, hotels were booked. And during that journey, which was 16 flights in 30 days and events and so forth, there was a lot brought to the surface. So I enjoyed the journey and the destination. So I enjoy what reactivity or programming is revealed as I commit to something guided by this feeling, this ecstatic feeling. And let's look at the word ecstatic here. So I took some definitions and I put them in here. Feeling or expressing overwhelming happiness or joyful excitement. Now, what is it for you? We're going to actually look at it from an interesting perspective in a moment, which is, I put this together here, 3 ways to think big. Because I recommend and I suggest dreaming big right from the beginning, thinking big right from the beginning. But I also recognize in my own experience that this was a progression. So part of the realization of who we are is experiential of achieving goals and raising the bar to what we perceive as big, recognizing also that these are labels that we give to it. Big goal, small goal, and that's okay, we give them these labels. Because when we set something that you could say challenges us or excites us or brings forth this feeling of ecstatic, we start to feel an overwhelming happiness and joyful excitement about the journey we're about to go on. So what he's suggesting is to tune into this feeling, honor this feeling, and maintain this feeling, and all the other things in your life take care of itself. I'll notice from my experience during that journey, as I reflect back, I was meeting interesting people. I was having interesting experiences, new experiences. I had revelation of certain programming that was within me in regards to fears, doubts, indecision, insecurity, and I had the opportunity to change that programming around, which I call purification of the mind, so that this becomes normal. It's natural for me to do this. I feel one with doing this, being this way. Now, actually, in 2020, I decided that I was going to, mid-2020, I decided I was going to stay out of hotels and Airbnbs and just maintain the flow. The goal was to maintain the flow. I recognized that whatever was going on in the outer world, it was important for me to, and that's why over the last few years, and one of the reasons why, I would discuss maintaining the flow, because experientially, I had to prove an equation that this journey that I was going to do for the last few years was also going to reveal programming within me that I can change. But my ecstatic feeling was not commit to a place and actually stay in different places, have different experiences, which is, again, what happened the last few years leading up to this point, where today, actually, I put a deposit down for a 1-year lease. And part of it is committing to one place so I could do the things that I want to do. I'll still be doing some traveling. But I went to Florida, Vegas, Mexico, California, different parts of Ontario, snowboarding. I picked up snowboarding this last few years, met a lot of interesting people, had a lot of interesting conversations, stayed in very interesting places, different communities, different towns, and kept switching it up until I decided I was going to stay in one place for 1 year for the next phase. Now, when I look back at the experience, I realized that the feeling, that ecstatic sensation that he's speaking of, that right there brought all these experiences that throughout the videos, I have been sharing them bit by bit. And I'm planning on sharing even more of these. Now, I believe that contributes, at least from my perspective, to one of the reasons why we are here. I really do believe it is the conscious use of speech and mind, the two gifts, to create, or as we're recognizing from the Neville Goddard conversations, reality is complete, to reveal what we desire, commit to it, go through the journey of realization. Now, interestingly enough, there's another definition that came up for the word ecstatic. It says, involving an experience of mystic self-transcendence. Mystic self-transcendence. Now, to me, this relates over to the spiritual alchemy process, which I've discussed a couple times. I'll put a link in the description to the 2 videos in which I discussed it. Because that's what I refer to as the purification of the mind, which is on the journey to realizing these visions, which are stimulated by joyful excitement of being ecstatic to, or committing to, as he says here, keeping it simple. He says, I would suggest that you imagine something so big it includes all things. And upon reflection, as we connect the dots looking backwards, we recognize what those things were being included. That's the power of working with the feeling. What I suggest is committing to the feeling, maintaining the feeling, and whatever it is that goes on in this 5-sensory experience, to recognize that any reactivity or any kind of programming that plays out in theater here, the source can be tracked back within, working with some modalities in relation to the spiritual alchemy process, which we also discussed from the Joseph Murphy perspective, our forgiveness and other aspects in the almost 2-hour video that I released on Thursday. I recommend watching it. And go through and enjoy also joyful excitement, the journey of releasing from this kind of thinking. See, where do we get this thinking from? The limiting, the disempowering, the programming that doesn't really resonate with us, that seems to throttle, stifle, or deny the expression of ecstatic. Well, usually from childhood experiences, and as we continue this journey, encouraging that kind of programming. So he said something about this where he says, you may not be able to see the fulfillment of your desires with your mortal eye. Your senses and reasons may deny their existence, but this is the way God created the world. You are invited to imitate him as dear child by remaining faithful to the unseen reality in your mind until it becomes seen in your world. And when it does, you will have proved God's law. Now, there's some deep insight in this. Let's look at this for a moment. He says, you're invited to imitate him as a dear child. So, when you're a child, you're void from this programming, limiting, disempowering, the kind of programming that throttles, stifles a person from going after what they desire, or as specifically put here, the feeling of ecstatic. Look at a child. They want to do what they really want to do, and they do things in an intuitive, nonlinear way. It's a process of self-discovery. It's a process of discovery of this world. And it's important to encourage children to continue this discovery journey. And although they may do things that seem nonlinear, it's important that we understand their perspective and actually learn from them. Because we can all benefit from being more childlike rather than going to sleep, because I believe children are awake, going to sleep in the programming, allowing the programming to move us into more of an autopilot of reactivity. So for whatever the reason may be, we identify with this programming and we want to become more childlike. We want to go more into a childlike state. And as far as I'm concerned, I look at ecstatic as a childlike state. So he is suggesting here to go after the feeling of childlike curiosity, which ties into intuition. Because a child does things to learn. They're curious. And what we want to do is encourage this childlike expression through us. Certainly, I've been doing it. And it's been very valuable, joyous, fun, and also it has revealed different programming that I have identified with, which I work with the principle of autosuggestion, again discussed in the last video, to remove that programming that I have been identifying with that we call thinking patterns, perspectives, ideas, that a child can tune into. And although they might not be able to articulate it in words, because we certainly increase our vocabulary and our ability to articulate in words as we continue on this journey, although they might not do it that way, they can feel it. They know what they resonate with and what they don't resonate with, and they honor what they resonate with. So to get to this place, what we want to do is value goals and visions and recognize, going back to the start of this conversation, that to understand more so, and this is individualized. So I shared with you my interpretations. I welcome you to find your own interpretations and internal spiritual relationship with the infinite world within. And one of the ways that I found, which is the way that I continuously do, is to pick a goal, pick any goal, commit to it, and some way, somehow make it happen. Known ways and unknown ways. Commit to it. If I experience any reactivity or unnecessary complexity and convolution, not necessarily with everything, I change that programming within myself, and then I achieve the goal. I didn't have to change the programming to achieve the goal, but I recognize that this is important for me to change that programming, because when I change that programming, then it's easier for me to be more in flow and encourage this feeling of ecstatic. Also, I find that it deepens my connection with intuition, such as what we discussed in the Art of Intuition video. Put a link in the description to that. I recommend watching it. So 3 ways to think big. You start with the spark. Pick a goal or re-spark yourself, because children are operating in harmony and we can learn from children. Pick any goal, see it all the way to completion. You go through the purification of the mind. And then start picking, quote, bigger goals. Because here's the thing about it. Big goals, small goals, as we continue realizing this process of creation and recreation and alchemical process and all the things that we talk about, we recognize that these are our own interpretations, and that's fine. Because when we say, I want to do something big, I want to achieve this big goal, there really is a feeling of ecstatic excitement in relation to it. And so, over the last couple years, this has allowed me to maintain my flow by prioritizing that ecstatic feeling. So much so that when I decided to book a place for 1 year, I saw a number of properties and I knew exactly what it is that I wanted, down to the list, and it wasn't a big list. I wanted to feel that that was the place. I wanted to feel that that was the place because I know that that feeling some way, somehow is going to open up all these doors. For example, I stayed in one place in 2012 when my IT business grew exponentially. It was a year where everything went exponential. And I decided the next year I wanted to transition away from it. There was a place that had an inspiring view, and I know how I felt in that place. I felt this feeling of ecstatic. And I believe that some way, somehow, that feeling of ecstatic contributed. As a result of imagining the ecstatic feeling, the business grew in nonlinear ways. Now, in 2016, I did that again. There was a place that I committed to staying for 1 year. And at that time, I was doing consulting. My consulting practice grew exponentially. So after doing this journey over the last couple of years and maintaining the flow and making so much progress, I really do resonate with this ecstatic feeling as an important aspect of this journey. And so the spark allows us to start the journey. Pick a goal, any goal, whatever it is, commit to it. Then pick the, quote, bigger goals, which allows for expansion, higher degrees of realization, higher degrees of awareness, because I learned a lot of things when I did those 16 flights in 30 days about myself, about others, about environments, about how the subconscious mind works, more so. So I tend to pick goals that are ecstatic, and also I find that these goals, I would consider them to be more challenging than before. And so I value the challenge, and I also find it relates to what I'd learned from the Steve Jobs commencement speech, where he said, do what you really love to do. Because it's, during those times where you commit to something that you really love to do, that, if things aren't necessarily moving and whatever the reason may be, you feel reactivity, you will stay committed. You'll stay committed to this process here, which has been really helpful for me, so I want to discuss it. And before we get into that, as you continue this journey of picking bigger goals and seeing them into existence, I recommend picking goals in other areas of your life as well. So you've got career, finances, you've got family, health, different areas of your life. And to get more into that, I recommend watching the Creating Your Vision video, which I released in the start of this year. I'll put a link in the description to that. Because then what you'll find is you will start to encourage this ecstatic feeling, and you will feel it more so in all areas that are important to you. Now, during the journey, we go through the spiritual alchemy process, as I had mentioned. That's a conceptual way of explaining the journey, which has been very helpful. And that spiritual alchemy process has been an inspiration for people like Carl Jung and other psychiatrists and psychoanalysts and psychologists that I've met and spoken to. They've been very inspired by the process of spiritual alchemy. Now, another model that we can work with is the Kolb learning cycle, which is also saying the same thing. We go through concrete experience by picking a goal. We reflect and we observe on the experience as we're going through the journey to learn about ourselves. Through the different experiences, we draw conclusions, which is considered abstract conceptualization, and we reconcile our divergent and convergent viewpoints. And then we go back into it with active experimentation. This is called the Kolb learning cycle. So let's discuss this in a little detail and relate it over to the feeling of ecstatic. See, we want to get ecstatic about that destination, and we want to get ecstatic about the journey to the destination, because then what happens is we are able to feel ecstatic all throughout and also imagine during the journey all the things from that feeling of ecstatic. As mentioned, when I feel ecstatic, I start to imagine certain things that relate over to that ecstatic feeling. So concrete experience could be looked at as picking a goal or picking a bigger goal or picking goals in harmony with multiple areas of your life, or doing something different that you don't normally do, or do the same thing that you do differently, such as spontaneously decide that you're going to travel. If that excites you, Or you can go and ask the question within, and you'll get the answer of what that is. Because I find whenever I ask that question, that answer always shows up. Or you could do the same thing differently. If you always do the same routine of how you go about your day-to-day, switch the routine up. Try something different. Try a different workout routine. Or instead of working out at one gym, try one of those calisthenic workouts at a park or something like that. Try something different. Because having these different experiences allows you to reflect on the programming that is within yourself. So that's number 2, reflective observation, reflecting on your experience. Here's some good questions to ask. What did you learn? What did you learn about your experience, what you're doing, your involvement with people, environment, circumstance, and information? And what did you learn about yourself? And we could take it a step further. What did you learn about how you learn? So I'm a big fan of learning, but also learning how to learn. So Kolb learning cycle, for example, is a learning model. There are many different learning and teaching models. I have, over the years, studied these different learning and teaching models and have incorporated in my personal development journey, and certainly I share them throughout the videos. But that's a good question to ask. What did you learn about how you learn? Maybe you find you learn more effectively in one environment versus another environment. Maybe you find you learn more so in a certain mastermind group rather than working by yourself on certain projects. Number 3, abstract conceptualization, drawing conclusions. So experiential learning, that's what this Kolb learning cycle is about. It's a model that articulates really well experiential learning, which is the premise of Neville's information. He says it all the time. Commit to it your imagination and see it into existence. Just commit to it all the way. And never waver on that assumption. Even when I was looking for this place, I remember I do this invisible counsel. Everyone knows I do invisible counsel. And so one of my invisible counsel members, as needed, is his mentor, Abdullah. Now, Abdullah only shows up in my invisible counsel if I'm about to settle for something less than what I truly want. That's when Abdullah shows up. Because then he says, who says you're going third class? You're there where you want to be now, and you got there first class. So I found some places that I kind of liked, and it wasn't related as deeply to this feeling of ecstatic. So Abdullah pops into my mind and says, third class, and he leaves. That's all he says. And that's what we learn from Neville, is commit to something, never settle, stay with it till you're complete and you experience that. Never waver on it. I mean, unless you want to. But I would suggest for the things that you desire from your heart, these are the things that you were actually meant to experience. And this, going back to the start of our conversation, helps us find this purpose. And what can help us here is this Kolb learning cycle, because this is experiential learning. You commit to something. Through the journey, we go through the cause and effect reflections, which is what did you learn? What did you learn about how you learn? Change accordingly, subconsciously. Those aspects we want to change in our self-image paradigm subconsciously. Then we draw conclusions. Okay, here's how we're going to do it next time, or here's what we're going to do about it, and here's what we're going to think about it. Here's how we're going to integrate it some way, somehow. And we're reconciling the divergent and convergent viewpoints. Divergent being looking at things from many different potentialities, many different perspectives. I can give you thousands of different interpretations of how to look at your particular experience in which you felt reactivity to. However, it's important to select the ones that are resonant to you and integrate that into your subconscious mind work, thus converging it, the reconciliation of divergent and convergent viewpoints. Then we live life. We go about our day-to-day, active experimentation, or we go do that thing, whatever it is. We try it out again. Or when you produce success, when you achieve a goal, raise the bar, go for another one. Some way, somehow, hunches and inspirations will show up. As I raise the bar for some of my business goals and other areas of my life, I recognize the hunch showed up from that ecstatic feeling to go find a place. So I actually find the place because I didn't settle for the places that I actually wanted, because when I walked in there, I felt that resonant feeling. Everything about it had that resonant feeling. And so thus, Abdullah never showed up then at that point. Because as mentioned, he only shows up if it looks like I'm going to settle for something. So try it out, whatever it is. Go after your goal. After you achieve it, raise the bar. Continue to do this. Pick bigger goals. And what you'll find is that eventually this will become automatic, more and more so. You'll become autotelic, as we refer to in the flow discussions. And then you will really have a individualized meaning, a real feeling of living in this ecstatic feeling more so. And you will know your own individual reasons why, purpose, mission, destiny, all those things will be individualized and meaningful to you. And you'll notice as you continue to honor that, everything seems to work out. And we further understood some of the alchemy stuff that we talk about, that we connect back to as a result of the reconciliation within, to who we really are, and we express accordingly what is referred to as the great work, which is translatable as innovation, service to others, arts, creativity. Could be multiple different kinds of expression, or a certain kind of expression in which others who experience that expression also feel inspired within to also go down this journey. And again, it all comes back to, in relation to this video, this feeling that he refers to here. So let's read his answer again. He says, personally, I like to confine my imaginal act to a single thought, but that does not mean I will stop there. During the course of the day, I may imagine many things, but instead of imagining lots of small things, I would suggest that you imagine something so big it includes all the little things. Instead of imagining wealth, health, and friends, imagine being ecstatic. You could not be ecstatic and be in pain. You could not be ecstatic and be threatened with a disposition notice. You could not be ecstatic if you were not enjoying a full measure of friendship and love. So in relation to where he says imagining wealth, health, friends, all those things end up becoming a natural expression from that ecstatic feeling. Some way, somehow, those things show up. As I shared with my journey when I did the 16 flights in 30 days and the last few years, and I reflect back on my experiences all throughout the years, it has always been this way. And also, if you reflect back on your experiences, you'll find the same thing as well. And so now we want to encourage it more so by encouraging that feeling of ecstatic. And, again, by definition, feeling or expressing overwhelming happiness or joyful excitement. That brings us into the feeling. Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it wonderful? Brings us into the feeling, and then everything else takes care of itself from there. And then we understand more so, involving in mystical or self-transcendence experiences, such as the lucid dreams and these other kinds of things that I also notice happening. And although I'm not necessarily looking for those experiences, they kind of just happen on the journey. It does open up my mind into deeper understanding of the infinite nature of existence, the infinite way reality works, many different perspectives, many different ways. And that's why I always say spirituality, really want to connect to our intuition and feel what resonates with us and honor it. And then we recognize that when they say in the Kabbalion, the all is unknowable. In other words, so infinite that when we get to a place where we feel that we understood it, we recognize that there's even more to understand. And that's actually a very good thing. Because this journey of recognizing your purpose and mission, you feel it more so resonance. You get into flow with it, deep autotelic with it. And there's more to do in this life and beyond this life, because I believe that our spiritual self is eternal. So let's go ahead and conclude this with an affirmation. You can say, isn't it wonderful that I feel ecstatic right now? Isn't it wonderful that I am on the journey to realizing my vision? Isn't it wonderful that everything I desire is brought forth into existence from a place of joy, bliss, and ease? Isn't it wonderful that I am infinite? Isn't it wonderful that anything that I commit to in my imagination, I move forward with, and all things in harmony and in contribution are brought forth in relation to what I desire? Isn't it wonderful that on the day-to-day journey, I learn about myself? I learn about different aspects of reality. I learn about others. I learn about the nature of existence. Isn't it wonderful that through the process of reconciliation within, my awareness increases as I select truly what I desire and recognize that what I want wants me back. What I desire desires me back, as the outer world is a reflection of my inner being. If you would like a copy of this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.